Daf Mem Beis Hamid Aleph will begin Daf Mem Aleph Hamid Beis, 3 lines from the bottom. Ki also Rav Dimi Amar Rabbi Yochanan, he said, Sholosh L'shonos Shamati. I've heard 3 halachas. There are 3 types of woolen strips, and I've heard halachas regarding the 3 strips of red wool. Achas shel para, one of the paraduma, achas shel sorim mishtaleach, the sorim mishtaleach and Yom Kippur, achas shel mitzvah, and the one that was used for the Torah of the mitzvah. Achas mishkal asar zuz. One of them, the weight is 10 zuz. Achas mishkal shnei sloim. The other one is the mishkal 2 sloim, which is the equivalent of 8 zuz. Achas mishkal shekel is a weight of a shekel, which is the equivalent of 4 zuz. So this argues on with Rabbi Yitzchak. We learned before that he said that only one of them has a shear and the other one doesn't. He holds that all 3 cases over here, that both the para and the soar of Yom Kippur, and also the soar of Mitzvah, they all have a shear. So he says this is the weight, but I can't explain which is which weight is attributed to what. Taisus asks the kasha, why isn't there a fourth? There's a 4th strip. There's a 4th strip of wool that's tied around to the soar LaShem. Not only the soar LaZazel, but we also learned previously that there was also the soar LaShem also had a red strip tied around it. Taisus answers that was only for a heker ba'alma, only to distinguish it between the other ones so it shouldn't get confused. It doesn't have any significant shear involved in it. But these other ones all have a different purpose. And it's not only to differentiate them so it doesn't get intermingled, but they'll have a purpose, and therefore they have a shear. He also, Ravin, Pirshim Mishmei Rav Yonasan, he explained it as follows. Shel para mishkal asar zuz. The paraduma, the mishkal, is asar zuz. Why is that? Because it has to be heavy enough. It needs a kavit that it falls into the burning, to the fire. Mishal sar mishalech mishkal shnei sloim. That has the second heaviest one, and that's 8 zuz, because that has to be long enough to divide into 2, to tie it around the horns and tie it around the rock. Mishal mitzvah mishkal shekel, but the one of mitzvah, which doesn't need the weight and it's not cut in 2, that is the lightest of it. It's only a shekel, is 4 zuz. They argue on this, the size of the strip used for paraduma. One says that it is 10 zuz, like we said before. The one says it's the lowest, it's only a shekel. So why he holds only a shekel? Taisus says because he holds that it doesn't need a kavit, and therefore it does not need more than 4 zuz. Alternatively, he says because 4 zuz is enough for a kavit. So he says that it's the lowest of the shear. And the simon is echad. So that's the Mamar Chazal. Here also one is the marba, one says the highest shear, 10 zuz, and one says the lowest shear of 4 zuz. For the Ravina, he said the machlokes was not by paraduma, but it was rather by the sorim mishtaleach. That was the same day that they had the machlokes, was the day that Rabbi Bar Kisha was nifter. And they made a simon on it. Rabbi Bar Kisha mechaper, his misa's mechaper, it's misa's tzaddik is mechaper. He was a great tzaddik. So that's mechaper kisar mishtaleach, just like the sorim mishtaleach. So that was the connection between the 2. Taisus asks, paraduma is also a mechaper, but he says the ikar of the paraduma is not a kapara. It is mechaper for the avana egel, but the ikar is not the kapara, it's the tahara. Mashen kain, the sorim mishlech is the ikar, the main function is the kapara. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, he said, shtei shchita shamati. I've heard that halachas legabe 2 cases of shchita. Achas shel para v'achas shel paroi. One of the paraduma and one is the par of the Kohen Gadol Yom Kippur. Achas ksher b'zar. One is kosher with a zar. The zar over here, the term is used loosely. It means one is kosher if it's not done with a Kohen Gadol. Achas psula b'zar, and the other one is posel if it is not done with a Kohen Gadol. It has to be done dafka by the Kohen Gadol. V'lo yadana hai minayim, but I don't know which is which. So We learned the machlokes legabi the shchitas para uparoi Rav Shmuel Chadamar para psula. One said that the para duma is possible. It's not done with the kain gadol. Paroi the para yom kippur ksher. V'chad amar paroi psula. The other one says no, but the par on yom kippur has to be with the kain gadol. If not, it's with the zaras psula and para ksher. But the para duma is kosher. So they argue on these halachas over here. Dr. Gemara at this time, the Rav Hudama Parah Psula, it's mistaken to say the Rav says that the Parah Duma is Psula. The Omar Rabbi Zera Shchitas Parah Bazar Psula. He says that the Shchita of the Parah Duma with a Zar, if it's not a kain gadol, is possible. The Omar Rav Allah, and Rav said on this, he said the reason for this, because Allah Zarvachuka Shaninaba. It says by the Parish Parah Duma, it says Allah. Allah was the Skan kain gadol. Meaning, so we said before that Sher Bizarre is Psula, it means someone who is not a Kohen or a Skan Kohen Gadol. So Elazar was a Skan Kohen Gadol. And it says Chulka. It says Chulka Satira, meaning that it has to be done exactly this way. So that was done by Elazar. It says that when Elazar kind of the shlit over there was done by Elazar, the Skan Kohen Gadol, and it says Chukas, so therefore the Parah Duma, the shlit has to be done by a Kohen Gadol. So therefore, it's mistaber to say that Rav says the Parah Duma is possible Zar, but Paroi on Yom Kippur is kosher. Frankly, more of a Rav, Ma'ishna Paroi Dirshu Elaz v'Chulka. So it has to be Davka by the Kohen Gadol Sgan Paroi Nami Ha Ksiv Aaron v'Chulka. It says also by Yom Kippur. It says v'hikriv Aaron is parachatas asher loy v'chiper. It says v'shachat is a parachatas asher loy. It also says Aaron. It says chulka. So what's the difference? My answer is shchita lav avodah. Shchita is not an avodah. Meaning, generally speaking, in korbanos in general speaking, in general terms, the shchita is kosher with a non-kohen. It's kosher with a zar mamash. So shchita is not an avodah. So therefore, the chukah, when it says chukah, is referring to the things that are avodah, but not which is shchita, which is not an avodah. In fact, the Gemara haki paranami. Well, say the same thing by the parah duma. What's the difference? Gemara says shiny parah the kasher beragabayis. No, parah duma is different because it doesn't follow with the standard principles and guidelines of a avodah, because it is kosher berakabayis. It's not kosher mizbeach. So therefore, they say shchita bazar is kosher, but parah duma is not a korban. It's not a kosher mizbeach. It's kosher berakabayis, and therefore it doesn't follow with those regular principles. For example, about v'lav kol degenu, isn't it a kol shekain say a kal v'chaymer? So, say a kal v'chaymer, that madach, you say that by kosher mizbeach, where you say that a shchita's lav avodah is kosher with a zar, kol shekain with something which is only kosher berakabayis, it should be kosher with a zar. The more answers, Omar Rashish Breder of Hidi, Midi the Hava Maras Nagoyim. He says, no, you can't bring a kal v'chaymer, because we see a case where something which is not kosher mizbeach, and but still, nevertheless, requires a kohen. We see Maras Nagoyim to inspect the nega, to see if the leprosy, if the nega, if the tsaras, if it's spread, if it's tomei, it has to be done dafka by a kohen, and it's not kosher mizbeach, and therefore there are things that are not kosher mizbeach, things that are not avodah, which require a kohen, and therefore I would say similarly that therefore the shchita of the parah duma has to be done by a kohen. And even though it's not a avodah, mida the havar maris l'goyim, the love avodah by kahuna, and it requires a kahuna. Therefore, you don't have a kal v'chaymer. Now, why should we say that the parah duma requires a kohen gadol? Because the way it's Rabbeinu Al-Yakim explains it is because it's more doima maris l'goyim and parah duma, which both are not kosher mizbeach. They are both more similar to each other, and just like Maras Nagoyim requires a kohen, therefore I would say that also Shchita the Parah requires a kohen gadol. So therefore he says the Chukah on Yom Kippur does not apply to shchita, and on Yom Kippur, the shchita of the par of the Kohen Gadol is kosher with a zar. He says that para is psula. It has to be done on Yom Kippur. It has to be done by the Kohen Gadol. Maishna para idichsiv Aaron v'chuka para nami haksiv elazar v'chuka. So why doesn't he apply it to the paradum as well? The more answer shiny hasim dichsiv v'shachat oiso lefanav. It says v'shachat oiso lefanav. It has to be shachted in front of him. So what does that mean? She'ezar sheichet. Ve'alazar roya, it's shechted lefanav. It's shechted oisa lefanav, before him, meaning that someone else is doing the shechita and he's watching. He's not shechting. Somebody else is shechting and he is observing it. He's watching it. V'rav, no, it's not to teach us that he doesn't do the shechita. What does it mean in front of him? It means shelo yasiach daitamim. It means that it should be in front of him, meaning, so to speak, that it should be on his mind all the time. He should not divert his attention from it. There shouldn't be hesach hadas. He should guard it all the time from tumah. That's what it means. No, this halacha. More answers. He learns it from the pasuk that says that it's burned in front of, before his eyes, meaning that it's before his eyes that he has to guard it. He cannot divert his attention from it. It has to be before him. The shmira of it has to be before him all the time. The Rav says, yes, he agrees with that, but that's mentioned by the soraf, by the burning of it. The Rav, chad b'shchita, v'chad b'sreifa. I need the pasuk by both cases, both by the shchita and by the sreifa, to teach me that there cannot be hesach hadas, utzricha. And I know I need it by both cases. Because of because if it only wrote it by shchita, I would say that over there he has to have shmir, he cannot have hesach hadas, mishum detchil savani, because that's the beginning of the avodah of the paraduma. That's the beginnings of it. Aval sreifa emaloi tzricha, but if it says sreifa, I would say at that point already he doesn't have to have special shmira. He can have hesach hadas. Because arachmana b'sreifa, if it's said by the sreifa, I would say it's dafka by the sreifa. Mishum dahashu the miskasha para, because now is the kashrus of the para. Now is when the para becomes kosher. So I would say it's dafka now when it's needed. But aval shchita emaloi, but by shchita I would say it's not required. So therefore I need it in both cases. Well, you're saying that it's in the shchita, it cannot be hesach hadas. You're saying that it's by the sreifa. So what is being excluded? What cases are when that you say you don't need a special shmir, that you could have hesach hadas? Taisus asks the kasha, well, why am I forced to say that it's lemut to anything? Maybe it's to teach me these cases, and I learn out from these two cases. I learn out for elsewhere. And you can't say that shnei ksuma boim kayach hadei melamdin because I have a tzrichus over here. I need both of these cases. Taisus answers because he says that if it would be that you are applying it to all cases, it should mention it rather by the lesser cases, and I would be able to learn out to all the other cases. It should say it by the case of for instance, the asifa. It should be, or by the sifas off, or the milumayim, or the filling up of the water. Why didn't the Torah mention it over there? Must be that the Torah is mentioning about these two cases which have a stronger need for it, as more mentioned. That's the beginning of the Veda, or it's the miskasha of the Parah. It's where the kasha is the Parah, and it must be that it's dafka in these two cases, but not elsewhere, because otherwise mention it by the lesser cases and learn out to the others. So what are the cases which I am excluding? If you say that it's going to exclude the case of gathering the ashes and filling the water for mixing, that over there you'll say that hesach hadas does not possible. No, you can't say that. It says l'mishmeres l'mei nidaksi. The pasuk says v'osav ish taras efer apor ve'iniach michutz l'machnem b'malkam Torah v'haisel hadas b'nei Yisrael l'mishmeres, which implies a safeguarding, a safekeeping. There can't be hesach hadas l'mishmeres l'mei nidach hatosi. That means until the time of the sprinkling. And the beginning of the pasuk, As the Tzais Rishon points out, it says va'osa, from asifa until the time of the sprinkling, it has to have a mishmeres. Gemara says, Ella, what's it excluding that Heschadas does not passol? Ella limute hashlachas eitz eretz ve'ezav shnit tailas. It's coming to exclude the case of throwing the wood and the hashlachas eitz eretz, the wood of the cedar wood and the ezav and the hyssop and the shnit tailas and the red wool into the fire. The lav gufa the por ninu. That's not an avoidance that's done with the par. That is throwing it into the burning of the parah. Over there, Eschadas does not pass on.